Hi there, and welcome to Highrise's YouTube channel. I'm Andrew Lepofsky, and today we're going to be diving into what makes Highrise such a unique and impactful community for growth-minded professionals. If you're here, you're probably wondering, is Highrise the right fit for you? Maybe you're curious about how our members have transformed their careers. Maybe you're considering whether the investment is worth it in both time and money. Well, you're in the right place. In this video, I'll be speaking with one of our members who's going to share their personal Highrise journey, how they've navigated the challenges, how they've seized the opportunities, and seen real results. Whether you're concerned about the cost or the time commitment, or just unsure if Highrise can help you reach your actual goals, you'll hear firsthand how others have done this already. So stick around and let's find out if Highrise can help you take that next big step in your career. I've got Paola here today. Paola, thank you for joining me.
Hi, Andrew.
Paola, do you want to maybe start off by introducing yourself?
Yes. Well, great to be here chatting with you. My name is Paola. I am the head of customer success at Recurrency. That's a startup based in San Francisco working in the inventory management space. I've been a part of Highrise for the past 4 years, since 2020, which is pretty crazy to think about. And I'm currently based in New York City.
How did you first hear about Highrise?
So I heard about Highrise before it was Highrise, meaning back when, Andrew, when you were first creating this, I was working at Airtable as a customer success manager. I have been chatting with friends of mine around career growth and issues or questions I was having about how best to navigate different scenarios in my work and day-to-day life. And one of my friends at Airtable actually knew Andrew directly, knew that Andrew was starting to put together Highrise, that the first cohort was currently being put together, and she offered to put us in touch. Andrew, I'm pretty sure we spoke once, and I immediately signed up, and I've been a part of the community ever since. Really great question. So for some background, I had never done coaching before Highrise. I had done therapy. And the way I thought about it, coaching, I think I kind of alternated between thinking that coaching will be a place where people will give me the answers as to what to do next in my career. And also I would think of coaching a little bit like career therapy. So a place to vent and let things out and talk about just what was going on in my day-to-day. And the reality is that one of the first surprises I got with Highrise was that I was not necessarily entirely wrong, but that's really not it, right? Like there's so much more to coaching around how to be your better self, how to think about your career more strategically, how to kind of combine or put together the dots or connect the dots around what I'm currently doing and how can I leverage this to get to the next step. So no one's going to give you the answers. I think that was one of my first surprises, but it's a way of having the right conversations and the right things to think about for you to get to those answers in a group. I was honestly skeptical about everything. And what I mean by that was I had never done something like this before. And when I joined Highrise, thinking back to it, I joined Highrise because I felt like I had exhausted all other avenues to think about my career, right? I was trying to get promoted. I was trying to grow in my job. I was trying to get a raise. And it felt like I wasn't really getting anywhere with my manager. I was talking to my friends who were great at giving me advice, but ultimately, or they were great at being supportive, but they really didn't know how to guide me. So they would say all the things around how I'm amazing and I should continue growing in my job, but they actually couldn't help guide me as to, okay, how am I actually going to do that? And ultimately, I think that a big part of me joining Highrise was this mentality of I'm looking for help and I don't know where to turn to for help. And this seems to be like something that would move the needle. But ultimately, being very honest, I didn't have high expectations, right? Because I had been so disappointed with things in the past. Long-winded way of saying, I totally understand the skepticism because I myself felt very skeptical. And I, in a weird way, thought that maybe if I just did coaching, the universe was going to realize that I was working on myself and then I was going to get the raises and promotions I was waiting for, right? Which basically is not the way it works. I think once I started with Highrise, I realized what it's actually like and how my skepticism came from a place of not fully understanding both what coaching could do for me and also what I was actually looking for. Because I think if you got this from everything I was just saying, I even think that I wasn't sure was what I was trying to get out of coaching, right? I was just trying to look for help and I didn't know where to go.
What were some of the things that you had tried in the past that didn't work, which maybe created even more skepticism?
Yeah, I tried a few different things. So I tried at work joining different small groups where we would work together and talk about career, for example. They're not, when you're doing things like that on your own, they're not really structured. They end up being more social than anything else or becoming just places to vent about career. I try working with my manager and just going to my manager with advice. But our managers play this interesting role where they're both trying to help us do our job better. And they are also investing in our career. But the reality is that they also have a lot of other people to manage. So their ultimate goal isn't my career growth, it's the team meeting expectations and meeting OKRs and things like that, right? So it's a bit of like a misalignment if you think about it. Um, I tried talking about it with my therapist, which I encourage everyone to do, but ultimately it's just a way of processing what you're going through, not really thinking strategically about what's next. Um, at some point I also joined groups that were specific for customer success professionals, but they were a little bit, how can I explain this really nicely? They were basically a combination of way too technical in a way that I didn't find helpful, and also just disorganized conversations about people doing customer success stuff that like told me more about things for my specific career, but didn't for my specific role, sorry, but didn't really speak to my long-term career, if that makes sense. When I was at my company back then, Airtable, they did have a stipend. It was a very small stipend. I can't remember top of mind exactly what it was, but I don't think it was more than maybe $500 to $1,000. It did mean that the initial payment felt less stressful in a way because I had some support, but the reality is that the majority of it came out of pocket. Um, I think one of the ways in which things were a bit different for me is that I joined Highrise. I got a little bit of help from my work. The majority of it came from me. And by the time it was my turn to pay for it entirely, because I had changed jobs, Highrise had more than proven its value. So it became kind of a no-brainer. Like I was no longer going to not do this because I could see what it could do for me. When I really think back about when I first joined, basically, the economic piece of it, like the payment piece of it is concerning. But the reality is that what I kept bringing it back to is I need to grow in my career. Everything I have tried hasn't helped, right? This, I don't know what it is yet. I'm still skeptical, but it seems to point in a good direction and it seems to have the signs that I'm looking for. It came down to like, am I willing to invest in my own growth fully and truly? Or am I going to try and keep going back to the things I was doing before that I knew failed? So it felt a little bit like a leap of faith, but it also felt like a leap of faith that was more needed because I had tried other things and seen how they failed. And I was just really, truly focused on investing in myself, if that makes sense. There were two main things, basically. So I joined Highrise first because I had gone through a really big career change about a year and a half prior. My background is actually in public policy. I had moved from DC to San Francisco, joined Airtable as a customer success manager, and I had been doing the job for over a year and I liked it. But I didn't know if I liked it because I was good at it or because I truly wanted to do this when I grew up. So part of it was I wasn't sure what I wanted to do long term in my career and if customer success was indeed the place for me. So one was kind of that clarity. And the other piece was I had a whole career behind me before joining Airtable. And I felt like at Airtable, I was really struggling to get the raises and promotions that I was aiming for because I didn't really know how to navigate the environment. I was very much struggling at negotiating, very much struggling at making a case for why I should get promoted or why I should get a raise. So yeah, those were the two reasons.
And did Highrise help you achieve those goals?
Did it. This is where I go on a long story of how it happened. Basically, the short answer is yes and no. And what I mean by that is it got me exactly to where I needed to be. It maybe didn't do it in the way that I was expecting it to happen. Meaning, when I first joined Highrise, what I thought would happen was I would start doing coaching, and then I would get a magical raise and a magical promotion, and I would have full clarity that what I was doing was what I wanted to be doing. The reality is that Highrise got me a bigger raise and a bigger promotion that I was looking for. But it was a bit of a different road that I was expecting. Basically, when I joined Highrise, the first thing I was trying to focus on was what do I want to do when I grow up, right? Through different sessions, through the conversations, through the different workshops with my cohort, through individual sessions with my own coach, I think I got to the point where I became truly confident in what I wanted to do. And that is customer success. But what also became really apparent to me was that it was customer success from a leadership perspective. What I truly appreciate about success is the strategy of it all, the building teams and the navigating high level picture, right? That wasn't something I had considered pre-Highrise. So I got the clarity of what I wanted to do. It was just, I thought I was just going to get to I want to be a CSM for the rest of my life. It actually made me realize that the industry I was in was the correct one, or the role I was in was the correct one. I guess the scope was the correct one, but the specific role in itself, I was looking for a different one. Mm. And then with Highrise, I did work very specifically on the things I'm mentioning. So I remember working, Andrew, with you and then with Jen on how can I have a conversation about a raise and a promotion. And I did go back to my manager and I did have those conversations. And I actually think they were the most successful chats I've ever had around raises and promotions, because I came to it from a perspective of what does my manager want to hear? Why should she care about getting me this raise? But the reason why I say I got to where I wanted, maybe in a bit of a different way, is because what became apparent with these conversations was that the company I was at wasn't actually the company that would set me up for the growth I was looking for. The raises and promotions they were offering after I came back and did the negotiation were indeed something that existed, but they didn't match my timeline, didn't match my expectations. And I actually decided to change companies. I don't know if you remember this back from 2020, right? Mm-hmm. But I basically went in with I just want my current job to give me a promotion. And then it turned on into, I don't want to be at this company anymore. I think it's a fantastic place to be at, but I don't think it's aligned with my long-term career goals. The long story short here, which I'm more than happy to go into more detail, is I ended up leaving Airtable, applying to other jobs. I actually applied to jobs before I left Airtable. I always like to say I swam through the interview processes. I applied to 3 jobs and got 3 job offers. What? And I mean, obviously I would like to think that a lot of it is my own skill set, and I tend to be a very confident person. But the reality is that the only difference that I see when I think about those interviews is that I was so confident in the value that I brought to companies and where I fit in and what I could do. And that came from Highrise, right? I wasn't able to verbalize it that way before Highrise. So what companies were seeing was that confidence, that certainty of what I could bring. And they really appreciated that and made 3 offers. I changed companies, joined a new company, again as a CSM, but a company that seemed to better match the growth I was looking for. And then working with Highrise, I went in the span of 4 months. I went from joining a company as a CSM to in the first 2 months being promoted to the manager of the customer success team, to in 4 months moving to being the head of the customer engagement department, so leading all of post-sales. So Andrew, going back to your original question, did Highrise deliver on those things that I was looking for? The answer is yes and no, because I was looking for a much smaller growth. I was thinking about it from the perspective of just what is that one immediate next step in terms of, I don't know, a 10K, 15K salary growth. What Highrise actually did was I got a 2-level promotion in my career, move up the career ladder, because I went from just thinking about what immediately do I want and more about where do I fit in long term and what is the best place for me to actually get there. Mm-hmm. So it's a long-winded way of saying it very much exceeded expectations.
But the interesting thing about that too is you gave it enough time for it to work.
Correct.
Right. So, not every skill, not every tool is going to be applicable in every situation. You tried it at Airtable, didn't work as you had expected or intended, but then it worked elsewhere. And that's
kind of, yeah. And to clarify something, I don't think that it didn't work at Airtable, right? After you and I had that conversation around promotions, I did go to my manager and I did have the most successful chat. Basically, the tool in itself worked. What became apparent was that the place I was in wasn't going to be the place that best served me long-term for my career growth. And I don't think I would have gotten to that realization without Highrise, because ultimately what I wanted was a raise. They were able to give me some kind of raise, right? And I could have ended there and been like, this is great. But what Highrise gave me was that ability to identify that, like, yeah, I was getting what I wanted, but truly what I thought I wanted, but truly what I was looking for was a more long-term, real career development process. And Airtable wasn't going to serve that correctly. So I see it as like Highrise was extremely successful. It also empowered me to choose to decline something I thought I wanted for something better, which I wouldn't have been able to do before. One of the main drivers for me to join Highrise, which very clearly became one of the biggest resources generally, is the fact that you're learning things in a cohort. Ultimately, people choose how they better approach different experiences, but I did feel that given what I was trying to work on, given the fact that I had changed careers, and given all the questions that I had, I kept saying that, like, I had questions about what questions should I be asking. The reality is that thinking back, I don't even think that like solo coaching would have had the kind of impact Highrise had, because so much of what I needed was to just see how other people were approaching situations and learning from their experiences and being able to reflect from it. In fact, some of the biggest learnings that I got, and probably some of the biggest aha moments that I got, came from the cohort, either pushing me or saying the uncomfortable thing and making me think about things differently. Like taking things that our coach Jen was walking us through and then adapting them to like real life situations. To me, to this day, the fact that I was able to not just learn from my own experiences, but the experiences of really smart people around me who maybe weren't in the same industry, but were also thinking about their career strategically and asking the same questions I was asking, that to me was hands down the best resource.
And there's also probably an element in the cohorts of, you're not alone. Right.
That's exactly it. You're not alone. And also you're approaching things with people who are in the same journey you are, right? When you asked before what I had tried before that hadn't worked, I would talk about career with friends. And I have wonderfully supportive friends who would say like, yeah, you should get all the races and be the CEO of the company, right? But ultimately, when you're chatting about these things with friends or with acquaintances or with coworkers, you're approaching it from the perspective of support. You're not approaching it from the perspective of let's challenge each other. Right? With a cohort, what I was getting was that they would be supportive and hear me out. And then they would also force me to ask the difficult questions and force me to think about the uncomfortable things. So you're not alone, but you're also surrounded with people who are as invested in their career as you are and as focused on actively thinking about it as you are. So instead of just being a supportive, yeah, you got this conversation, it becomes a, how can we get you there? Productive kind of chat. Honestly, I don't know if I've told you this, Andrew, but one of my favorite things about Highrise has also just been the caliber of people I've met. Every time I do a reference call, every time I do a coffee chat, every time I join some like activity co-working session, I think there's smart people everywhere. But again, it's smart people that are focused on the same thing I'm focused on. So the conversations feel so much more productive because every little chat feels like we're all focused on learning from each other. And then honestly, my favorite Highrise activity to date was when we did a book club a couple of years ago. And at the end of the book club, we had a fireside chat with the actual author. And we sat there and asked him the questions and had the conversations. Like, it was just the kind of experience that I hadn't gotten before in terms of like sitting down with an author after finishing a book and reflecting on the learnings with them. So that was a really big treat. I did my cohort in Highrise. I think we started in the summer of 2020. It was either July or August 2020, right? This is more than 4 years ago. My cohort ended, I believe, about a year after that. Everyone moved to the next stage of their careers. Our cohort just finished. We're all still in touch, but I've been since doing solo coaching and with you and with Jen, and I've also just been part of the different activities that Highrise has to offer. There's been more than many times where I have thought, okay, maybe it's time to stop doing Highrise. It's been 4 years, right? And it's always felt like with the first time I got promoted to manager of success, I was like, I did it. I'm where I want to be. Highrise did what I wanted it to do. Let me just stop doing it. And then I got promoted to head of, and I also had a moment of, now I'm the head of the department. I don't need this anymore. And the reality is, what became really apparent to me is that coaching isn't a one-off. It's like therapy, right? There's always things you're going to be working on, and there's always Not necessarily that next specific step in my career, but just how can I continue becoming my better self and my best executive, leader, CS, whatever I want to be. So I think the way I think about Highrise has changed a little bit because I'm no longer working on, okay, as a next step, I want to be a insert title here. I think I'm on the right path and I'm excited for opportunities ahead. What I'm working on now is just how can I become the best head of customer success I can be. I've been doing this for 3 years, I want to say. I've been head of success for about 3 years. And I think I'm really good at a lot of things, but there's difficult decisions that I have to make or ways of mentoring my team that I haven't had to do before. Or I've just had to like work with more difficult team members or make difficult leadership decisions. There's just all these kinds of things that come up that do two things for me. One, really reinforce the fact that I don't think Highrise is a playbook. Highrise is a toolkit. And there's a lot of tools I can get from the toolkit. And I just want to continue expanding that toolkit. And then the other thing it's also made me realize is that I no longer see Highrise as a means to an end. I see Highrise as a continuous source of support so I can continue being the best employee and professional I can be. Two things come to mind. The first one, and I say this very often, right? Coaching is like therapy. We all need it, but not everyone's ready for it. The first piece, I know that people have concerns about the cost. They have concerns about the time. In hindsight, yes, those are very, very fair things to think about, right? You want to make sure that you can afford it and not be stressed out, and then you have the bandwidth and so on and so forth. But more than those two things, I think that the most important thing is, do you have the emotional commitment to dedicate time to this? And what I mean by that is, when I first joined Highrise, I think a part of me kind of thought that if I just did coaching, the universe was going to notice it, and then I was going to get all the things that I wanted. And I don't know if you remember this, Andrew, but about a month in, you and I had a chat about this where I was like, I feel like this is fun, but I don't know if I'm getting all the things out of it. And you were like, well, are you actually doing the work? And I was like, no, I'm not, right? I was kind of attending sessions, chatting in sessions, but then not really taking the time to think about how does this apply to me? How am I reflecting ahead of sessions on the next topic? How am I actually thinking about my day-to-day and what I'm struggling with, right? So the first thing, more than the time commitment and so on and so forth, is are you ready to actually ask yourself the hard questions and think about things proactively? Because otherwise, regardless of what you're doing, if you're not ready to do the work, it's just not going to work for you, regardless of what it is you're paying for.
We always tell folks, you're not going to lose weight by paying for the gym. You're going to lose weight by going.
That's spot on. And it's so interesting for me to think about because the reality is that the time commitment of Highrise isn't very high, right? There's like a cohort session. There's some reflections you're doing in between sessions. Like if I think about it, it's maybe like 1-2 hours a week tops, right? The reality is that do I have 1 or 2 hours a week? I'm swamped all the time, but if I have 2 hours to watch TV, I have 2 hours for Highrise.
I mean, we all do, right? When folks say that, I say, let's look at the screen time app on your phone.
And I can promise you, I can promise you that you have the time. But the issue isn't, do you have the time? It's, are you willing to spend that time working on yourself and thinking about how to be a better professional or better at what you're doing? And what I was saying to a friend recently is actually like, you can sit in front of the TV and watch Netflix for an hour. You have the time. But there's also a difference between, are you sitting in front of the TV and watching Netflix and paying attention to what you're watching, or are you scrolling through your phone while you're doing that, right? It's like, are you actually invested in what you're doing, or are you just wasting time in front of a screen? So it's the same way I see it. It's like, are you just going to show up and listen to things with your camera off and not be an active participant? Then honestly, probably a better use of your time. Or are you actually going to go and do the work and ask the questions and challenge yourself and challenge others? So that's the first thing I would think about. And then the other thing I would say is, I don't think it was a mistake the way I approached it, but I do think I went to Highrise with a very clear, like, I just want an X% raise and this title, right? I would encourage people to also be open to career growth isn't necessarily linear. Career growth doesn't mean your next step is an X% increase in your salary and a specific senior in your title. It's really around, are you in the role that is going to make you the happiest long term? Are you doing something that challenges you, right? I think if I hadn't been open to that with Highrise, I would have taken like the offer that I got from Airtable when we had the conversation and been fine with it, But I think the biggest thing I got from Highrise was kind of the courage to say, yeah, I thought this is exactly what I wanted, but in reality, what I'm looking for is just long-term career growth in a way that just continues challenging me. So I don't think I would have like had the courage to quit my job and change companies and do all this again if it wasn't because of Highrise. So long-winded way of saying keep an open mind, because even if you're working on something very specific, you might surprise yourself by just thinking about things more around what is going to be what's best for you long term. I think that the biggest concern I see with people when they have to think about the economic investment of Highrise is this is the out-of-pocket cost right now. And I don't get me wrong, I think it's a very, very fair concern, especially if you're not sure if you're willing to put in the time, because ultimately an expense, if you're not willing to like actually do the work, is probably not going to be the best use of your money, right? But if you already know that this is something that you want to prioritize, then it becomes less around, am I willing to do the work, and more around what is the outcome that I'm trying to get. And what I mean by that is I can think about it extremely like from a numbers perspective, right? I invested in Highrise when I first started. It took me about a year to get my 2 promotions. In the span of that year, if I can be extremely transparent, my salary went up by over $100,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's the case for everyone. Everyone has different career growth. So like, to me, that's extremely like, okay, it more than paid for itself. But but since then, for example, I've changed jobs and I've taken a pay cut. You're aware of this, right? Like when I changed from head of CS to a different place as head of CS, I took a pay cut, and it was something that I felt excited to do because I was thinking about things more in the lens of what is going to be the best growth for me long term. On top of just thinking about the financial aspects in itself, it's also around, if you don't do this, where do you expect to be in a year or two? Meaning, when you think about your career, right, you're thinking about where you're going to be in 12 months, in 24 months, in 36 months, whatever that may be. Highrise, if you're investing the time and you're doing the work, is probably going to get you to where you should be in your career much faster than if you did it on your own, right? Ultimately, I have the job I would have expected to get. I just got it significantly faster than I would have without Highrise. So if I hadn't invested the money in Highrise, I would have gotten where I am today in maybe 3 to 5 years' time. I got to where I wanted to be in a year, right? So is the investment worth getting to where I wanted to be 3 years quicker than would have expected it? Yeah, that's really what I'm trying to think about it, right? It's like, to me, it's a way of supercharging your career. And is the investment worth getting to where you want to be faster? If so, to me, it's a no-brainer.
How do you make that same case for yourself for the time investment? Now,
The time investment.
Now, clearly, you're maybe it's fair to say that you think, hey, this helped me get here faster, right? Maybe it helped me get here 3 years faster. Maybe it helped me get here a year faster. Maybe it helped me get me 6 months faster. And so investing an hour to 2 hours a week to do this, that's worth it, because how many hours are there in a year? There are like 8,000 hours maybe in a year. So like that has like paid off for you. But like, what would you say to other people about, hey, they're thinking about, a lot of folks come to us and they say, hey, you're adding more to our plate, right? And what I respond to folks is, yes, for the moment, initially we are adding more, no doubt. But it's not as if you're not spending time already thinking about these things and dealing with them. The idea is we want to help you, we want to help take things off your plate.
I think that's a fantastic question. And I think as you were asking it, what was coming to my mind is what I think I often struggle when I think about, for example, getting in shape, right? I'm thinking about, for example, okay, I want to like lose some weight by X date or do something else. And then I can do that by, for example, going to the gym 30 minutes every day. And then what has happened in the past many, many times is I know what I need to do and I don't do it. And then the date arrives when I was expecting to, for example, be stronger, be thinner, whatever you wanted to be. And I realized that the time went by anyway, and I'm exactly where I was 6 months ago or a year ago. That's the way I think about it. It's like the time is going to go by regardless of whether you invest in yourself right now or not. That's a given. right? The quality of the time that's going to go by, that's what's going to be different. You're still going to have time that you spend scrolling through your phone. You're still going to have time that you spend watching the TV. That's still going to happen. The only change that's going to happen with Highrise is that some of that time is going to be spent thinking about your career, caring about where you're going to be, working with people around actually getting there. And then what it comes down to me is when the time passes, do you want, like, if the time is going to go by anyway, do you want to be exactly where you were a year ago? Or do you want to be closer to your career goals than you were before? So it's weird associated with a diet or with exercise, but ultimately the time is going to go by anyway. If it's going to go by anyway, and you're also going to spend some time watching TV, a year from now, what's going to make the biggest difference to your life? Well, the first thing is that actually forces me to keep them top of mind. One of the things that I've noticed from now I'm like doing more coaching just directly with you, directly with Jen, right? The first thing is that my goals cannot just be an afterthought, which I do think they were in the past, where like I knew I had goals, but I didn't really spend time thinking about them. And if you're not actively thinking about them, then are you actually working towards them? Now just knowing that like every few weeks I'm going to have a meeting with you, a meeting with Jen, or every few weeks I'm going to have to just come back and reflect on what exactly did I do means that my goals are much more top of mind. And if your goals are top of mind, you're by default gonna do more work towards getting towards them. The other thing is also helps me reprioritize what those goals are. Like my goal before Highrise was I just want a specific raise, right? Since then, I feel like my goals are a lot more fluid in that I'm just thinking more about how can I be a better professional and less about I want this specific next step. So it means that I allow my goals to change as my perspective on things changes, as what I enjoy about my job changes, as how I see the company growing changes, which I do think in a way makes me a lot more adaptable, I think. And then the final thing is there is someone who's keeping you accountable, right? Like I know that like there's people who like write out their goals and put them somewhere and read them all the time. And I definitely value that. But the reality is that it's the difference between, I think, working out on your own in your house and working out at a gym where someone's watching you, right? One means that, yes, you're the one who's pursuing something, but there's always people around you who are cheering you on and making sure that like they can help you get there.
I really appreciate your time today, Paola. If people want to get in touch, maybe ask you a question or network or something like that, what's the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, great question. My LinkedIn's always open. I mentioned this already. One of my favorite things about Highrise is connecting with people. So if people are considering joining Highrise or have questions about my experience or just really want to connect and you're in customer success and want to talk customer success, LinkedIn is a great way to do so. Otherwise, my email is just my full name, Paola Cordovez @gmail.com. I tend to be less responsive via email because things get lost in my inbox, but I will make sure to get back to you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Paola.
Of course.